The rope cut into her wrists like wire. Sister Margaret hung from the oak tree, her blood dripping onto white snow. 15 degrees below zero. 15 minutes before hypothermia would kill her. The scarred man raised his knife. "Maybe we start cutting pieces." That was when the first shot rang out. 500 yards away. Through the head. One shot. From the forest a ghost emerged. A mountain man with nothing left to lose. This is the story of the winter I saved a nun and learned to live again. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls of the ranch house. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, blanketing the Wyoming prairie in silence. Inside, an old man sat in his leather chair, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Caleb Ashford was 72 years old. His hair had turned silver, his face was carved with the deep lines of a life fully lived, but his eyes remained sharp and clear, the eyes of a man who had seen too much, survived too much, and somehow found peace on the other side of darkness. Across from him sat his grandson Tommy, 15 years old, tall and lean, with that restless energy that comes with being caught between boyhood and manhood. The boy had been quiet all evening, but now he shifted in his chair, his jaw set with determination. "Grandpa," Tommy said, his voice breaking slightly on the word. "People in town, they say you killed a priest once. Is that true?" The old man did not answer immediately. He stared into the fire, watching the flames consume the logs with patient hunger. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, like gravel sliding down a mountainside. "No," Caleb said. "I didn't kill him, but I wanted to, and maybe I should have." Tommy leaned forward, his eyes wide. "What happened?" Caleb set down his coffee cup. The ceramic made a soft sound against the wooden table, final and decisive. He looked at his grandson, really looked at him, seeing himself 47 years ago, angry, confused, searching for truth in a world that seemed to have none. "You want the truth?" Caleb asked. "Or do you want the easy version, the truth?" The old man nodded slowly. "Then I'll tell you. But when I'm done, you'll have to make a choice. The same choice I had to make 47 years ago in the worst winter of my life." He settled back in his chair, his eyes growing distant, seeing through time and snow to another place, another man he used to be. "It started," Caleb said, "on the morning they tried to hang her from a tree. The rope cut into her wrists like wire through butter. Sister Margaret Barrett could feel the blood warm at first, then freezing instantly in the bitter cold. 15 degrees below zero. Each breath was a knife in her lungs. The morning air was so cold it burned. She hung from the lowest branch of an oak tree, her feet 6 inches above the frozen ground, close enough to see every detail of the snow, far enough that she couldn't touch it, couldn't find purchase, couldn't fight. 3 men circled her like wolves around wounded prey. The first man was tall and thin, with a deputy's star pinned to his coat. Samuel Harris. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. A man who had sold his soul and was just beginning to realize the price. "Sister," Harris said, his breath fogging in the dawn light. "Last time I'm asking, where is the mountain man?" Margaret's teeth chattered so violently she could barely form words. "I don't know who you're talking about." The second man laughed. He was shorter, broader, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. A hired gun, one of many that had drifted into Red Creek in recent months. "Father Brennan says you and him stole the money together," the scarred man said. $3,000. That's a lot of silver for a nun to be carrying. "Father Brennan," Margaret managed, "is a liar." The third man stepped closer. He was the oldest, maybe 50, with gray hair and cold eyes. He drew a knife from his belt, tested the edge with his thumb. "A nun calling a priest a liar," he said softly. "Who's going to believe that?" Margaret tried to answer, but the cold had stolen her voice. She could feel her body shutting down piece by piece. Her feet were numb. Her hands were beyond pain, entering that dangerous territory where flesh begins to die. She had maybe 15 minutes before hypothermia made the decision for her. The scarred man reached up, grabbed the rope and pulled. Margaret rose another 6 inches. The hemp dug deeper into her wrists. Blood dripped onto the white snow below each drop, a small burst of red against the endless white. "Tell us where he is," Harris said. His voice broke slightly. Even now, even doing this, some part of him still had a conscience. "Tell us and this ends." "I don't know," Margaret whispered. It was the truth. She had never met the mountain man they kept asking about. Had never even heard his name until 3 days ago, when Father Brennan had stood in her cell and told her she would hang unless she confessed to stealing with her accomplice. An accomplice she had never met. A crime she hadn't committed. A confession she would never make. The scarred man raised his knife. "Maybe we start cutting pieces. See if that improves her memory." That was when the first shot rang out. The sound echoed across the valley like the crack of God's judgment. 500 yards away. Maybe more. The scarred man's head snapped back, a neat hole appearing in his forehead. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, dead before he hit the ground. "Find cover!" Harris screamed. "It's him!" The second shot came 3 seconds later. The older man with the knife took a bullet through his shoulder, spinning him around. He fell, clutching the wound, blood steaming in the frozen air. Harris dove behind the oak tree, his revolver in hand. His eyes scanned the tree line to the north, searching for the shooter. From the forest, a figure emerged. He moved like a ghost through the snow. No sound, no wasted motion, just a tall, broad-shouldered man carrying a rifle like it was part of his body. He wore buckskins and furs, his face hidden behind a thick beard and the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. But his eyes were visible. Even from 50 yards away, Margaret could see them, blue and cold and utterly without mercy. Caleb Ashford stepped into the clearing. He walked with the confidence of a man who had nothing left to lose. In his hands, a Winchester rifle still smoking from the last shot. On his back, a Sharps .50 caliber, the weapon he'd used for the long-distance kills. At his hip, a Colt Peacemaker revolver. He stopped 20 feet from Harris and the tree. "Cut her down," Caleb said. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the snow like a threat. Harris pressed himself against the tree, his revolver shaking in his hand. "Ashford," Harris said, You shouldn't be here. This is law business." "The law," Caleb said, "doesn't hang innocent women from trees in winter. Cut her down. Now." Harris hesitated. Behind the tree, Margaret could see his face. Fear warred with duty, warred with the last shreds of his conscience. He looked at the 2 men on the ground, one dead, one bleeding. He made his choice. Harris holstered his revolver, pulled his knife, and cut the rope. Margaret fell. She tried to catch herself, but her frozen legs gave out. She collapsed into the snow, her body shaking so violently she couldn't control it. Caleb didn't take his eyes off Harris. "Tell Brennan," Caleb said, each word precise and cold, "that she's mine now. If he wants her, he knows where to find me." Harris backed away, grabbed the wounded man, and half-carried, half-dragged him toward their horses. In 30 seconds they were gone, riding hard for town. Only then did Caleb lower his rifle. He walked to where Margaret lay in the snow. She looked up at him through half-frozen lashes, her vision blurring. His face was a landscape of scars and weathered skin. A man who had lived hard and expected to die the same way. He knelt beside her, his movements surprisingly gentle. He took off his coat, a thick bearskin that still held his body heat, and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. "Can you ride?" he asked. Margaret tried to speak, but her jaw wouldn't work. She managed to shake her head. Caleb nodded once, as if he'd expected that answer. He lifted her with surprising ease, cradling her against his chest like a child. She could feel the steady beat of his heart through his wool shirt. Strong, reliable, alive. "Hold on," he said. Margaret tried to ask why. Why had he saved her? Why was he here? Who was he? But the cold and the fear and the relief crashed over her all at once, and consciousness slipped away like water through her frozen fingers. The last thing she remembered was his voice, low and steady, as he carried her toward the trees. "You're safe now," he said. "I've got you." Margaret woke to warmth. It flooded her body like a miracle, painful and wonderful at the same time. She was lying on something soft, wrapped in blankets that smelled of wood smoke and leather. A fire crackled nearby, its heat almost overwhelming after the brutal cold. She opened her eyes slowly. The cabin was small but well built. Log walls chinked tight against the wind. A single room, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its flames dancing behind an iron grate. Bunks built into the walls. A rough wooden table. Shelves lined with books, canned goods, ammunition, and weapons. So many weapons. 3 rifles mounted above the door. 2 revolvers hanging from pegs. Boxes of bullets stacked neatly in the corner. A man who expected trouble and was prepared to meet it. Margaret tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her wrists. She looked down and saw they were bandaged, clean white cloth wrapped carefully around the raw rope burns. "Don't move yet," the voice came from across the room. Margaret turned her head slowly. Caleb Ashford stood at a small stove stirring something in a pot. In the better light of the cabin she could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 25, certainly not more than 30. Tall, easily over 6 feet. Broad shoulders and lean muscle, the build of a man who worked hard every day just to survive. His face was hard to look at, not from ugliness, but from intensity. A scar ran from his left eye to his jawline, puckered and white. His eyes were startling blue, the color of winter sky. His hair, black and thick, fell past his shoulders. His beard was full and dark, but it was his hands that caught Margaret's attention. They moved with surprising grace as he ladled soup into a wooden bowl. Gentle hands, capable hands, hands that knew both violence and care. "Where am I?" Margaret asked. Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "My cabin," Caleb said. He carried the bowl over, set it on a small table next to the bed. 9,000 feet up. Storm coming in. We've got maybe 2 days before they can track us if the snow falls like I think it will. Who are you?" "Caleb Ashford." He said it simply as if the name should mean nothing. "Eat. You need food." Margaret looked at the soup. It was simple, just broth and vegetables and chunks of meat, but it smelled better than anything she could remember. Her stomach clenched with sudden, desperate hunger. She reached for the spoon, but her bandaged hands couldn't grip it properly. Frustration and humiliation washed over her. Caleb watched for a moment, then sat down in a chair next to the bed. "May I?" Margaret nodded, too tired and too hungry to be proud. He took the spoon, dipped it in the broth, blew on it gently to cool it, and held it to her lips. Margaret drank. The warmth spread through her body like light through darkness. They ate in silence. Caleb fed her with patient care, never rushing, never commenting on her helplessness. When the bowl was empty, he set it aside and stood. "I need to check your feet," he said. "Frostbite is the danger now." Margaret nodded again. She watched as he carefully unwrapped her feet from their blankets. She could feel them now, which was both good and bad. The pain was intense, but pain meant the flesh was still alive. Caleb examined her toes with clinical precision, pressing gently, watching for color and response. After a long moment, he nodded. "You'll keep them," he said. "Some blistering, maybe lose a toenail or two, but you'll walk." "Thank you," Margaret said. Caleb didn't respond. He rewrapped her feet, stood, and walked back to the stove. He poured himself a cup of coffee from a battered pot and stood looking out the single small window at the falling snow. Margaret studied him in the firelight. There was something broken about him, she realized, something fundamental that had been shattered and never properly healed. He moved through the world like a ghost present, but not truly living. "Why did you save me?" she asked. Caleb was silent for a long time, so long that Margaret thought he might not answer at all. Then finally he spoke. "Because I know what Brennan is." "You know Father Brennan?" "Everyone within 100 miles knows Brennan." Caleb's voice was flat, emotionless. "He buys and sells people like cattle, takes what he wants and calls it God's will." Margaret felt a cold that had nothing to do with her frozen body. You believe me about what he's done." Caleb turned from the window. His blue eyes met hers, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. Rage, deep and controlled and absolutely lethal. "I believe you," he said. "Why?" "Because I've seen it before. Watched him take Sarah Mitchell's land after her husband died. Watched him burn John Davis's house when Davis refused to donate to the church. Watched him destroy anyone who stood in his way." "Then why hasn't anyone stopped him?" "Because he owns the deputy. He owns the town. He owns everything and everyone." Caleb took a long drink of his coffee. "And the people who tried to stop him ended up dead or gone." Margaret absorbed this. She thought of the last 3 months in Red Creek, the way Father Brennan would look at her when she worked in the church office managing the books, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, the way he touched her shoulder just a bit too long, spoke just a bit too close, and the way his face had changed when she'd shown him the discrepancies in the ledger. $15,000 missing over 3 years, money that should have gone to widows and orphans, money that had simply vanished. "He's been stealing," Margaret said. "From the church fund. I found the proof." Caleb nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd long suspected. "That's why he wants you dead." "He said I stole $3,000, that I had an accomplice." Margaret looked at Caleb. "He said it was you." "I've never stolen anything from anyone." "I know. I've never even met you before today." "Doesn't matter to Brennan. He needs someone to blame. I'm convenient." Caleb set down his coffee cup. "I live alone. I don't talk to people. I have no witnesses. If he says we're partners in crime, who's going to prove otherwise?" Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, hot and stinging. "This is my fault. If I had just kept quiet." "Then he would have kept stealing, kept hurting people." Caleb moved back to the window, his back to her. "You did the right thing. Sometimes doing right gets you killed. That's just how the world works." "You sound like you speak from experience." Caleb didn't answer. Outside, the snow fell harder, the wind beginning to howl around the cabin's corners. The storm he'd predicted was coming. Margaret lay back on the bed, exhaustion pulling at her like an undertow. But before she slept, she asked one more question. "Why do you live up here alone, Mr. Ashford?" His answer was so quiet, she almost missed it. "Because being alone is better than hurting the people you love." She wanted to ask what he meant, but sleep pulled her under before she could form the words. The office was warm, almost stifling. A fire blazed in the hearth and oil lamps cast a golden glow over the expensive furniture. Father Dominic Brennan sat behind his massive desk, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. He was not wearing his clerical collar. At this hour in private he saw no need for the pretense. He wore a fine suit, tailored and expensive. His hair was perfectly combed. His hands bore rings of gold. He looked like what he was, a man of wealth and power. The church was simply his vehicle. Deputy Samuel Harris stood in front of the desk, his coat still dusted with snow. His shoulder was bandaged where he'd been grazed by Ashford's bullet. His face was pale, his eyes haunted. "You let her live," Brennan said. His voice was soft, but there was steel beneath the silk. "Worse. You let Ashford take her." "He would have killed us all," Harris said. His voice shook. "You don't understand. The man he's not normal. He shot Collins from 500 yards in the dark, through the head, one shot. I know exactly what Caleb Ashford is capable of." Brennan stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a thick folder. He laid it on the desk, opened it. Inside were pages of notes, newspaper clippings, military records, a complete dossier on a man who thought he'd disappeared. "Caleb Ashford," Brennan read aloud. 25 years old. Union soldier, fought from 1861 to 1865. Sharpshooter. Decorated for valor at Gettysburg. Wife Catherine and daughter Sarah, both deceased 1868. Killed by Quantrill's raiders. He flipped through more pages. After his family died, Ashford refused all government compensation, refused his military pension, sold his land, gave the money to the church, ironically enough, and vanished into the mountains. 10 years ago. Has been living like a hermit ever since. Harris shifted uncomfortably. Then you know he's dangerous. I know he's broken. Brennan closed the folder. A broken man with nothing to live for is dangerous, yes, but he's also predictable. How so? Brennan smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Men like Ashford think they're dead already. They think they have nothing to lose. But that's not quite true, is it? Because now he has Sister Margaret. And if he's protecting her, that means he's starting to care again. And caring makes you weak. He walked to the window, looked out at the snow-covered town below. His town, every building, every soul, all of it under his control. We change strategy, Brennan said. We don't hunt them. We let them think they're safe for a few days. Let them bond. Let Ashford start to care. And then we take everything from him. Again. Brennan turned back to Harris. Send word to Denver. I want hunters. Real professionals, not the local talent. I'm offering $500 for Ashford's head, $1,000 if they bring him alive. And Sister Margaret. Brennan's smile widened. She dies either way. Make sure the hunters understand that. No witnesses, no loose ends. Harris swallowed hard. His hand drifted unconsciously to his badge, as if touching it could somehow cleanse him. Sir, he said carefully, what if someone finds out the truth about the money, about Thompson? Brennan moved fast for a man his size. One moment he was by the window, the next he was inches from Harris's face. His hand gripped the deputy's throat, not quite choking, but the threat was clear. No one will find out, Brennan said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Because you will make sure of that. Won't you, Samuel? Harris nodded frantically. Brennan released him, smoothed down his vest, and returned to his desk as if nothing had happened. Good, Brennan said. Now get out. Send the telegrams. I want hunters here within 3 days. Harris fled. Alone in his office, Brennan poured himself a glass of expensive whiskey. He held it up to the lamplight, admiring the amber color. To you, Sister Margaret, he said to the empty room. You should have kept your mouth shut. Now you'll die with the mountain man, and everyone will think you were guilty all along. The perfect solution. He drank deep, savoring the burn. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Red Creek in white. It looked peaceful, pure, an illusion like everything else in this town. Margaret woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment she thought she was back in Boston in the small apartment she'd shared with Thomas before tuberculosis had taken him. Then reality returned, and with it the ache in her wrists and feet. She sat up slowly. The pain was less today manageable. She could feel her toes properly now, which was both good news and uncomfortable. Blisters had formed during the night. Caleb was at the stove, his back to her. He'd changed clothes, she noticed. Now he wore simple wool pants and a thick flannel shirt. His hair was tied back with a leather cord. Even in domestic tasks, he moved with economy and grace. "Can you walk?" he asked without turning around. I think so." "Try." Margaret swung her legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold under her bandaged feet, but not unbearably so. She stood slowly, testing her weight. It hurt, but she could manage. "Good," Caleb said. He turned, handed her a plate of food, bacon, beans, and a piece of cornbread. "You'll need your strength. Storm's settling in. We're going to be here a while." Margaret took the plate, sat down at the small table. Caleb sat across from her with his own meal. They ate in silence for a moment. "Mr. Ashford," Margaret began. "Just Caleb." "Caleb, I need to know what happens next. When the storm clears, Brennan will send more men. He already has. I'd bet my best rifle on it. So what do we do?" Caleb finished his bacon, set down his fork, and looked at her directly. "We survive. We stay hidden until I can figure out a plan. And you tell me everything you know about Brennan's operation. Everything." Margaret nodded. She spent the next hour telling him what she'd discovered. The altered ledger books, the fake receipts, the pressure tactics used on widows and poor families, forcing them to donate land or money to the church. The way Brennan would visit certain families, and days later, those families would sign over their property. Caleb listened without interruption, his face expressionless. but Margaret could see his hands resting on the table. They clenched slowly into fists as she spoke. When she finished, he stood and walked to the window. Outside, the snow fell in thick sheets, reducing visibility to mere feet. They were completely isolated. "You said 15,000 over 3 years, Caleb said. "Where did it go?" "I don't know. The money just disappears from the books." "But—" Margaret hesitated. "But there are rumors. The miners talk when they think no one's listening. They say Brennan has been buying up land options on the eastern slope, that he knows something about where the next silver strike will be." Caleb absorbed this. "So he steals from the church fund, uses it to buy land, then makes a fortune when silver is discovered. Smart. Evil, but smart. Can we prove it?" "Not without those ledger books. Do you have them?" Margaret shook her head. "Brennan took them after he arrested me. He probably burned them by now." "Maybe. Or maybe he kept them as insurance." Caleb turned from the window. "Either way, our immediate problem is survival. In 2 days, maybe 3 professional hunters will start arriving in Red Creek, men who track for a living, men who won't give up just because of bad weather." "How many?" "At least 3 or 4, maybe more if Brennan's scared enough." Margaret felt cold despite the fire's warmth. "We can't fight that many." "No, we can't." Caleb walked to a rough map pinned to the wall. It showed the surrounding mountains, valleys, and trails. "But there's someone who might help. Old Jack Mackenzie. He has a cabin about 15 miles northeast, lower elevation. He's a friend. The only friend I have." "Can we trust him?" "With my life. I already have more than once." Margaret stood, walked to the map. Her feet hurt, but she could manage. "When do we leave?" "Not yet. You need another day to heal, and we need to wait for the storm to pass. Try to leave in this, we'll freeze to death before we make 5 miles. Caleb traced a route on the map with his finger. "When we go, we'll move at night. Stay off the main trails. Should take us about 2 days to reach Jack's place if we're careful. And if they track us, then we fight." Caleb said it simply, as if discussing the weather. "I'll do what I have to do to keep you alive." Margaret looked at him, this strange, broken man who had risked his life for a woman he'd never met. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this?" Caleb was silent for a long moment. Finally, he walked to a small shelf near his bed and picked up something. He brought it back to the table and set it down carefully. It was a letter. The paper was yellowed with age, the envelope worn from being handled. The handwriting on the front was feminine elegant. The postmark read, April 10th, 1868. "What is this?" Margaret asked. "A letter from my wife." Caleb's voice was rough. "Written 3 days before she died. Mailed to me in Red Creek, but I never got it. I was drunk. Stayed in town too long. By the time the postmaster forwarded it to me, Catherine and Sarah were already dead." Margaret reached out, then stopped. "Have you read it?" "No." "Why not?" Caleb picked up the letter, held it like it might break. "Because I'm afraid. Afraid that her last words will be telling me what I already know. That I failed her. That I wasn't there when she needed me. That I don't deserve forgiveness." "Or," Margaret said gently, "maybe her last words are telling you that you do." Caleb looked at her, and for the first time she saw past the hard exterior to the man beneath. A man carrying guilt so heavy it had driven him into exile for 10 years. A man who thought he didn't deserve to live, much less to be happy. "I can't open it," he whispered. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Margaret understood. She'd felt the same way after Thomas died. That crushing weight of survivor's guilt, the constant question of whether you could have done more, been better saved them somehow. "I understand," she said. They sat in companionable silence as the storm raged outside. After a while, Caleb stood and began preparing dinner. Margaret watched him work, noting the precision of his movements, the care he took with simple tasks. "You're good at this," she observed, "taking care of someone." "I used to be married," Caleb said without looking at her. "You don't forget how." "Tell me about her, about Catherine." Caleb stopped cutting vegetables, his shoulders tensed, but then slowly he began to speak. We met in Kansas before the war. I was 18. She was 16. Her father owned a general store. A small smile touched his lips the first Margaret had seen. She thought I was an idiot. I probably was, but I made her laugh, and that was enough. What was she like? Strong, smarter than me by half. She could shoot a rifle better than most men ride all day without complaining and still make dinner taste like heaven. The smile faded. She put up with 4 years of me being gone fighting in a war that tried to kill me every day. Never complained. Raised Sarah alone while I was gone. When I came back, she didn't ask questions about what I'd seen or done. Just held me until I stopped shaking. Margaret heard the break in his voice and knew what came next would be hard. April 1868. Caleb continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Quantrill's raiders hit our settlement. They were Confederate guerrillas who never accepted that the war was over. Burned, looted, killed anyone who'd fought for the Union. He set down the knife, braced his hands on the counter. I was in Red Creek 30 miles away, buying medicine. Catherine was pregnant with our second child. I told her I'd be back by evening. Should have been, but I ran into some old Army friends. We drank. We talked about the war. We got drunk, and I forgot about time. Caleb, Margaret said softly, you don't have to. I stayed in town 3 days, he said, his voice hardening. 3 days. When I finally rode home, there was nothing but ashes. The raiders had come through the second night. They locked every door from the outside and set fire to the buildings. Catherine and Sarah, they didn't make it out. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling his pain like a physical thing. The letter, Caleb said, turning to face her, was written the day before they died. Catherine mailed it to Red Creek, figuring I'd get it when I came back. But I was too drunk to collect my mail, too drunk to come home, too drunk to save my family. It wasn't your fault. Whose fault was it then? Caleb's voice rose. I was the husband, the father, the protector. I had one job, Margaret, one job, and I failed. You couldn't have known. I should have been there. The words exploded out of him. If I'd come home when I said I would, if I'd stayed sober, if I'd been the man I promised Catherine I'd be when we married, they'd still be alive. He grabbed the letter from the table, held it up. This, he said, this is why I live in the mountains, why I don't talk to people, why I have nothing and want nothing, because I don't deserve anything more. I don't deserve peace. I don't deserve happiness. I don't deserve forgiveness. Margaret walked to him despite the pain in her feet. She took the letter from his hand and set it back on the table. Then she did something that surprised both of them. She hugged him. Caleb froze. He stood rigid, his arms at his sides, every muscle tense. Margaret held on anyway, her arms around his waist, her head against his chest. She could feel his heart pounding. You're wrong, she said. You deserve all of those things, and more. For a long moment nothing happened. Then slowly Caleb's arms came up and wrapped around her. His hands shook. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. And he wept. 10 years of grief, guilt, and isolation poured out of him in great racking sobs. Margaret held him through it all, this broken man who had saved her life, offering the only thing she could presence understanding and the knowledge that he wasn't alone anymore. When the storm finally passed, both inside and outside, they separated. Caleb wiped his face roughly with his sleeve, embarrassed. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be. You needed that. I don't usually. He trailed off. I know. Margaret sat back down, giving him space. But maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe you've been alone too long. Caleb didn't answer. He returned to making dinner, but something had shifted between them. A wall had cracked, if not fallen completely. They ate quietly. Afterward, as night fell, Caleb banked the fire and prepared to sleep on the floor, giving Margaret the bed. Caleb, she said as he settled down with a blanket. Yes. Thank you for saving me, for telling me about Catherine, for being human. In the darkness, she heard his reply. You're welcome. And Margaret, thank you for reminding me that I am. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain. But inside the small cabin, two broken people had found, if not healing, then at least the possibility of it. And sometimes, possibility is enough. The storm broke just before sunrise. Caleb woke to silence the sudden absence of wind more jarring than its presence. He rose from his makeshift bed on the floor, moved to the window and looked out. 3 feet of fresh snow covered everything. The world had been transformed into a blank canvas, beautiful and deadly. Beautiful because it looked like peace. Deadly because it meant they were trapped for at least another day, and because when they did move, their tracks would be impossible to hide. Margaret stirred in the bed behind him. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "The storm, yes. Everything else, no." Caleb moved to the stove, began building up the fire. "We need to talk about what happens next." Margaret sat up, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. In the gray dawn light, Caleb could see how much she'd changed in just 3 days. The fear had not left her eyes, but it had been joined by something else. Determination. Steel. "I'm listening," she said. Caleb poured coffee, handed her a cup, then sat down at the table with his own. He'd been thinking about this all night, running through scenarios, calculating odds. None of them were good. In about 6 hours, the sun will have been up long enough to start melting the top layer of snow, he began. The trails will become passable, at least for men on horseback who know what they're doing. By tomorrow morning, professional trackers will be out looking for us. How do you know? Because that's what I'd do if I were Brennan. Caleb sipped his coffee. He's had 3 days to bring in hired guns from Denver or even further, men who track for a living, bounty hunters probably. He'll offer good money, $500 at least, maybe more. Margaret absorbed this. "And we're going to your friend's cabin." "Jack Mackenzie, yes, but we need to be smart about it." Caleb stood, walked to the map on the wall. "The direct route is 15 miles northeast, but that's what they'll expect. So we're going to go south first, make it look like we're heading for New Mexico. Then we'll circle back north through the high passes. Won't that take longer? 4 days instead of 2, but it might buy us time." Caleb traced the route with his finger. "The high passes are dangerous this time of year. Most men won't follow, and if they do, the terrain favors defense." Margaret came to look at the map. Her shoulder brushed his, and Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in 10 years. Awareness. Connection. He stepped away, uncomfortable with the sensation. "What about supplies?" Margaret asked, either not noticing his discomfort or choosing to ignore it. "I keep this cabin stocked for winter. We'll take what we can carry. Food for a week, ammunition, medical supplies. I have snowshoes for both of us. You ever used them?" "No." "You'll learn fast. You don't have a choice." Margaret turned from the map to look at him. "Caleb, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Always am." "What are our actual chances of surviving this?" Caleb met her eyes. He'd been asked that question before by young soldiers in the war who knew a battle was coming. He'd always told them the truth then. He would now. If it was just Brennan and his local men, 70%, maybe 80%. But professional hunters, men who do this for a living, 30%, maybe less. Those aren't good odds. No, they're not. Caleb set down his coffee cup. "If you want, I can create a distraction. Lead them away from you. You could surrender, tell them I forced you to come with me, that you don't know anything." "Would Brennan let me live?" "No." "Then that's not an option." Margaret's jaw set. "We survive together, or we don't survive at all." Something shifted in Caleb's chest. A feeling he'd thought dead. Respect. Admiration. Maybe something more, though he wouldn't let himself name it. "All right then," he said. "We leave at sunset. Get some rest. Tonight's going to be hard." The telegram had arrived at 9 that morning. Deputy Harris stood in Father Brennan's office watching as the priest read it for the 3rd time. Brennan's face was calm, but Harris had learned to read the small signs, the tightening around the eyes, the slight curl of the lip, the way his fingers drummed once on the desk. The priest was pleased. 3 men, Brennan said, setting down the telegram. "Arriving this evening. Cole Mason and his associates." "Do you know the name?" Harris shook his head. Cole Mason is the best tracker between here and the Mississippi. He found the younger gang when the Pinkertons couldn't. He tracked the Apache kid through desert where nothing should be able to survive, and he's never not once failed to bring in his target. How much is he costing you? $1,000. $500 now, $500 when he delivers. Brennan stood, walked to his window. A bargain, really. Ashford and the nun will be dead within a week. Their bodies will be found in a snowdrift, somewhere tragic victims of the mountain winter, and all our problems disappear. Harris shifted uncomfortably. Father, I've been thinking. What if we just let them go? They're running. They're not a threat anymore. Brennan turned slowly. His face was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. Samuel, he said softly, are you having doubts about our arrangement? No, sir. I just think. You think. Brennan crossed the room in 3 quick steps. He didn't touch Harris, but he didn't need to. His presence was threat enough. You're not paid to think, Samuel. You're paid to follow orders, my orders. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Good, because if I even suspect that you're considering betrayal, you'll end up like Robert Thompson. Do you remember Robert? Harris's face went pale. He remembered. Thompson had been a merchant who'd witnessed one of Brennan's land seizures, threatened to testify. 2 days later, he'd been found at the bottom of a ravine. Accidental fall, the report said. Harris had been there. He knew the truth. I remember, Harris whispered. Excellent. Brennan's smile returned. Now I need you to arrange accommodation for our guests. The hotel 3 rooms, and make sure everyone in town knows that federal marshals have arrived to hunt down the criminals. Let people think justice is being served. Federal marshals. That's what we'll tell people. No one needs to know they're hired guns. The story is simple. Sister Margaret stole money and fled with her accomplice mountain man, Caleb Ashford. Marshals track them down. Tragic ending. The town mourns and moves on. Harris nodded mechanically. He'd become good at nodding, at following orders, at swallowing his conscience in exchange for money and safety. But lately the weight of it was becoming harder to bear. Is there something else, Samuel? No, sir. I'll see to the arrangements. Harris turned to leave, but Brennan's voice stopped him at the door. Oh, and Samuel, when this is over, when Ashford and the nun are dead, you and I are going to have a conversation about your future. I sense you're not entirely committed to our partnership anymore. That concerns me. Harris didn't turn around. I'm committed, Father. I certainly hope so, for your sake. Harris left, closing the door behind him. He stood in the hallway for a moment, his hands shaking. He'd sold his soul to Brennan 3 years ago, taking money to look the other way during land seizures. It had seemed harmless at first, just paperwork, legal gray areas. But it had escalated, always escalated. And now he was an accomplice to theft, assault, and murder. He thought about Caleb Ashford up in the mountains with the nun. 2 people running for their lives. 2 people who'd done nothing wrong except discover the truth. For the first time in 3 years, Samuel Harris wondered if it was possible to find redemption. And if so, what price it would require. Caleb had been preparing all day. Supplies sorted, packed, repacked for optimal weight distribution. Weapons cleaned and loaded. Routes memorized. Contingency plans formed for every scenario he could imagine. Margaret watched him work. She'd offered to help, but he'd gently declined. This was something he needed to do himself, a ritual of preparation that was almost meditative. She understood. She'd seen soldiers before the war, Thomas's older brother among them, and recognized the pattern. Men preparing for battle became focused, internal, ritualistic. Instead, she'd spent the afternoon practicing with the snowshoes Caleb had given her, walking in circles around the cabin, learning to lift and place, to trust the unfamiliar equipment. Her feet still hurt, the blisters from frostbite, tender and angry, but she could manage. She had to manage. Now, as the sun touched the western peaks, painting the snow in shades of gold and orange, Caleb called her inside. "Time to gear up," he said. He'd laid out everything on the bed. For himself, his Winchester rifle, the sharps for long distance, his Colt revolver, a Bowie knife with a blade as long as her forearm, ammunition for all the weapons, food for 5 days, a bedroll, extra clothes, medical supplies, rope, and a dozen other items that spoke to a life lived in constant readiness. For her, a smaller pack lighter but still substantial. Food, warm clothes, a wool blanket, medical supplies. And to her surprise, a pistol, a small revolver suitable for a woman's hand. "I don't know how to use this," Margaret said, picking it up carefully. "You're going to learn, right now." Caleb took the gun from her, checked that it was unloaded, then handed it back. "This is a Colt .32, smaller than mine, less recoil, easier to handle. 5 shots. You load it like this." He showed her his hands moving with practiced efficiency, how to open the cylinder, insert the cartridges, close it securely, how to thumb back the hammer, how the trigger would feel, how to aim using the notch sight. "In the dark up close you won't use sights," Caleb said. "You'll point like you're pointing your finger. See that knot in the wall over there?" Margaret nodded. "Point at it. Not with the gun yet, with your finger." She did. Without thinking, her arm came up, her finger extended naturally toward the target. That's how you shoot in an emergency. You don't aim, you point. Your body knows where things are. Trust it. He handed her the revolver. "Now do it with the gun." Margaret raised the pistol. It felt heavy, awkward, deadly. But when she pointed it at the knot, following her instinct, rather than trying to aim precisely, the barrel lined up perfectly. "Good," Caleb said. "Remember that. If someone's coming at you, if you're scared, if you can't see clearly, you point and you pull the trigger. Don't think, just react." "Have you had to do that often?" "More times than I can count." Caleb took the gun, loaded it, and handed it back. "Keep it in your coat pocket. Don't take it out unless you mean to use it. And if you do take it out, you fire. Understand? No warnings, no hesitation. Someone threatens you, you shoot them." Margaret looked at the gun in her hand. The weight of it felt like the weight of a soul, heavy with potential for good or evil. "I don't know if I can kill someone," she said quietly. "You can if the alternative is dying, or watching me die." Caleb's eyes held hers. "I need you to promise me something, Margaret. If we get separated, if something happens to me, you keep running. You get to Jack's cabin and you tell him everything. He'll know what to do." "Caleb, promise me." "I promise." "Good." He turned away, began strapping on his own weapons. "Now let's go. We have 15 miles of night travel ahead of us, and we need to be far away before they can track us in the morning." They left as the last light faded from the sky. Caleb led his movements sure and steady, despite the darkness. Margaret followed, concentrating on placing her snowshoes correctly, on not falling, on keeping up. Behind them, the cabin stood silent and empty. Caleb had left the fire burning, left signs that they were sleeping. It would buy them a few hours, maybe until dawn. Every hour counted. They headed south as planned, leaving obvious tracks. Caleb wanted the hunters to follow this trail at first. Only when they were several miles away would he implement the next phase of his plan. The moon rose nearly full, turning the snow into a landscape of silver and shadow, beautiful and merciless. Margaret's breath came in clouds. Her feet hurt. Her legs burned from the unfamiliar motion of snowshoeing. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to rest. Caleb noticed. Every hour he would stop, check the back trail scan for pursuit. While he did, Margaret would lean against a tree, gasping, gathering herself for the next stretch. She never asked for more time, never said she couldn't continue. After 4 hours they reached a high ridge. Below them the land dropped away into a valley, then rose again to the north. This was the crucial point. "This is where we change direction," Caleb said. "From here we're going to walk along this rock face. The stones bear no snow, won't leave tracks. Then we'll drop into that valley and head northeast. With luck, the hunters will follow our tracks south and waste a day before they realize we doubled back." "That's clever. That's survival." Caleb studied the back trail one more time. No signs of pursuit yet, but they'll be coming. Count on it. They made the crossing, carefully walking single file along the exposed rock. It was dangerous work. One slip would mean a fall of several hundred feet, but it was necessary, and they made it across without incident. From there they descended into the valley, moving slower now, more carefully. The forest was thicker here, the trees providing some cover, but also limiting visibility. Every shadow could be a threat. Every sound could be pursuers. By midnight, they'd covered 8 miles. Caleb called a halt in a small cave he knew barely large enough for 2 people, but dry and sheltered from the wind. "We rest for 2 hours," he said. "I'll take first watch." Margaret didn't argue. She was exhausted, her body pushed beyond anything she'd ever experienced. She wrapped herself in her blanket and was asleep within minutes. Caleb sat at the cave entrance, his rifle across his knees, and watched the night. The moon was high now, bright enough to read by. He could see for hundreds of yards down the valley. Nothing moved except wind-stirred branches and the occasional night bird. He thought about Margaret sleeping behind him. This woman he barely knew, who'd somehow become the first person in 10 years that he cared whether they lived or died. It was dangerous, he knew. Caring made you vulnerable, made you weak, made you make mistakes. But it also made you human. And despite 10 years of trying to forget, Caleb was still human. Margaret woke to Caleb's hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. She came alert instantly, her hand going to the pistol in her pocket before she remembered where she was. "Easy," Caleb whispered. "Just time to move. My watch your turn to sleep." "I can keep going," Margaret said, though her body screamed otherwise. "No, you sleep. I'll wake you in 2 hours, and we'll move again." Caleb settled himself at the cave entrance. "Trust me, you need the rest." Margaret wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind was too active. After a few minutes of lying there, she spoke into the darkness. "Caleb." "Yes." "Tell me about Jack Mackenzie, your friend." Caleb was silent for a moment. Margaret thought he might not answer. Then quietly he began to speak. "Met Jack in 1867, year before Catherine died. He was trapping in the mountains, and I was on leave from the army. We ran into each other during a snowstorm, ended up sharing a camp. He's maybe 40 years older than me, old enough to be my grandfather. But he never treated me like I was young or stupid." "What's he like?" "Ornery, stubborn. Got a limp from where a bear took a chunk out of his leg 20 years back. Can outshoot most men half his age. Knows these mountains better than anyone alive." Caleb shifted position. "After Catherine and Sarah died, after I came up here to die, Jack found me. Didn't ask questions, didn't offer sympathy, just brought supplies every few weeks. Made sure I didn't starve or freeze. He sounds like a good friend. The best, only one who didn't give up on me." Caleb's voice roughened slightly. "He'll help us. If anyone can, he will." Margaret pulled her blanket tighter. "And if he can't, then we keep running. Canada's only 200 miles north. We make it there, Brennan's jurisdiction ends. We'd be safe. You'd leave your home, your mountains, to keep you alive." "Yes." The simple certainty in his voice made Margaret's chest tighten. When had this happened? When had she stopped being a mission, a problem to solve, and become someone he'd sacrifice for? "Caleb," she said softly, "I need to tell you something. About my past. About why I became a nun." "You don't have to." "I want to." Margaret sat up, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. In the moonlight filtering into the cave, she could see his profile, strong and scarred and patient. "My husband Thomas. He died 3 years ago. Tuberculosis. I watched him waste away for 18 months. Watched him cough up blood. Watched him lose weight until he was nothing but skin and bones. And there was nothing I could do. I'm sorry. We never had children. Thomas wanted to wait until he established his business. Then he got sick, and it was too late." Margaret's voice caught. "After he died, I was alone. No family, no money, no purpose. I thought about killing myself. Actually stood on a bridge one night, looked down at the water, and thought how easy it would be." Caleb turned to look at her. "What stopped you?" "A nun. She was walking home from evening prayer, saw me on the bridge, and came over. Didn't ask what I was doing, didn't lecture me, just stood there with me for an hour until the moment passed." Margaret wiped her eyes. She invited me to the convent, said I could stay as long as I needed. No pressure to join, no expectations, just a safe place. And you stayed. I stayed. Eventually I took vows. Not because I felt called, but because I didn't know what else to do. The convent gave me structure, purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. She laughed bitterly. Some nun I turned out to be. Lasted less than 2 years before I was running for my life. You're a good person who uncovered corruption. That's not failing. That's integrity. Is it? Or did I just cause trouble because I was too stubborn to keep my mouth shut? Caleb stood, walked over and sat down next to her, close enough that their shoulders touched. In the cold cave, his warmth was welcome. My wife Catherine, he said, used to say that integrity is what you do when no one's watching. You found something wrong and you reported it, even though you knew it would cause you problems. That's integrity. That's courage. I don't feel courageous. I feel terrified. Welcome to courage. That's what it always feels like. Caleb looked at her. You know what else Catherine used to say? That fear is just your body telling you that something matters. If you weren't scared, it would mean you didn't care. Margaret turned to meet his eyes. They were very close now, close enough that she could see the individual scars on his face, the flecks of darker blue in his irises, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting at distant threats. Do you care? She asked quietly. About whether I live or die? Yes. No hesitation. No doubt. More than I should. More than is smart. Why? Because you remind me what it's like to be human, to care about someone other than myself, to have something worth fighting for. His hand moved almost unconsciously to touch her face. His fingers, rough from work but gentle, traced the line of her jaw. I thought that part of me died with Catherine. Maybe it did, but you're making me remember what it was like when it was alive. Margaret leaned into his touch. I'm scared, she whispered. Not just of Brennan and his men, but of this, of what's happening between us. So am I. We barely know each other. I know enough. Caleb's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. I know you're brave. I know you're honest. I know you don't give up. That's more than most people learn about each other in years. Margaret closed the distance between them. The kiss was soft, tentative, two damaged people reaching for connection in a dark and dangerous world. It lasted only a moment before they pulled apart, but it changed everything. We should rest, Caleb said, his voice rough. Long day tomorrow. Yes, Margaret agreed, but neither of them moved. They sat together in the cave entrance, watching the moon cross the sky, not speaking, but no longer alone. Whatever happened next, whatever dangers waited in the dawn, they would face them together. And for now, that was enough. Cole Mason arrived in Red Creek just after sunrise. He rode at the head of his small group, a man who drew attention without trying. Tall and lean, with shoulder-length black hair and a face like weathered leather. His eyes were the color of gunmetal, cold and assessing. He wore trail clothes and 2 revolvers tied low on his hips. Behind him rode 2 men. The first was called Snake, though no one remembered his real name. He was short and quick, with small dark eyes that never stopped moving. A tracker by trade, he could follow sign over bare rock if he had to. The second was Bear, massive and slow-moving, with a beard that covered most of his face. He didn't talk much, but he didn't need to. His presence said enough. Together they were the most feared tracking team in the territories. And Father Brennan had hired them to kill 2 people who'd never hurt anyone. Deputy Harris met them at the town's edge. He'd been awake all night, dreading this moment. Up close, the 3 hunters looked even more dangerous than their reputation suggested. These were not men who asked questions or showed mercy. These were weapons pointed and released. Father Brennan's waiting for you at the church, Harris said. Follow me. They rode through town in silence. Curious eyes watched from windows and doorways. Word had already spread. Federal marshals had arrived to hunt the criminals. The good people of Red Creek felt safer already. If they'd known the truth, they might have felt differently. Father Brennan met them in his office, all smiles and clerical grace. He'd put on his collar for the occasion, the better to play his role as concerned shepherd of his flock. "Gentlemen," Brennan said warmly, "thank you for coming so quickly. I understand time is of the essence." Cole Mason didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room, his eyes cataloging everything: the expensive furniture, the gold cross on the wall, the ledger books on the desk. A man who lived very well for a man of God. "You have $500 for me," Cole said. His voice was flat, empty of inflection. "Of course." Brennan produced an envelope thick with bills. "Half now, half when the job is done." Cole took the envelope, counted the money with practiced efficiency, and tucked it into his coat. "Tell me about the targets." "Sister Margaret Barrett. 28 years old, perhaps 5'6", brown hair, gray eyes. No survival skills, city-raised. She stole $3,000 from the church fund." "And the second target?" "Caleb Ashford. 25 over 6 feet tall, very dangerous. Former Union sharpshooter. Lives in the mountains, knows them intimately. He's been up there for 10 years. Cole's expression didn't change, but Harris saw Snake and Bear exchange a glance. This was different from their usual jobs. This was hunting a man who knew how to survive, how to fight, how to kill. "You understand," Cole said, "that hunting an experienced mountain man in his own territory in winter is not a simple job." "Which is why I'm paying you $1,000, Brennan replied smoothly. "I'm told you're the best. I need the best." Last known location: Ashford's cabin, about 15 miles north-northeast, 9,000 feet up. They've been there for 3 days. But the storm just broke. They'll be moving soon if they haven't already. Cole nodded slowly. "Any particular requirements?" "Alive, dead evidence of death." Brennan's mask slipped for just a moment. His eyes went cold. "Dead, both of them. And I need proof. Bring me something that confirms they're gone. After that, the bodies can stay in the mountains. The snow will hide them until spring, and by then no one will care. And if they're taken alive, then kill them anyway." Brennan leaned forward. "I need this clean, Mr. Mason. No witnesses, no loose ends. No possibility that either of them ever comes back to tell their story." Cole studied the priest for a long moment. He'd hunted outlaws, murderers, and thieves. He'd tracked Apache warriors and escaped slaves. He'd done a lot of things he wasn't proud of, but he'd never knowingly hunted innocent people, and his instincts, honed by 20 years in this profession, were telling him that Sister Margaret Barrett and Caleb Ashford were innocent. But $500 was $500, and the second half was another $500. That was a year's wages for most men, enough to retire on, enough to finally stop. "We'll need supplies," Cole said. "Cold weather gear, ammunition, a week's worth of food, and fresh horses. Deputy Harris will provide whatever you need. Then we leave in 2 hours. The trail's already half a day old. Any longer, and we might lose it." Brennan stood, extended his hand. Cole shook it, feeling the soft skin of a man who'd never worked a day in his life, the handshake of a man who paid others to do his violence. "Good hunting, Mr. Mason." "Always is," Cole replied. They left. In the hallway, as they followed Harris to the stables, Snake moved close to Cole and spoke in a voice pitched for his ears alone. "Boss, that priest is lying. The woman and the mountain man, they're not criminals. This is something else." "I know," Cole said. "Then why are we doing this?" Cole didn't answer right away. They reached the stables, began selecting horses and gear. Only when Harris was out of earshot did Cole respond. "Because we're being paid to. Because that's what we do." He checked the action on his rifle. "But that doesn't mean we have to like it, and it doesn't mean we can't keep our eyes open." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Cole said quietly, "that if Ashford and the woman are innocent, they might have information Brennan doesn't want getting out. And if they have that information, it's valuable, maybe more valuable than $1,000. Snake grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Now you're talking." They rode out of Red Creek an hour later, 3 men on a mission that wasn't quite what their employer thought it was. Behind them, Deputy Harris watched them go and felt the weight of his guilty conscience grow heavier. He thought about Caleb Ashford up in the mountains protecting an innocent woman. He thought about his own role in all this, the lies he'd told, the crimes he'd enabled. And he thought about whether it was possible even now to do the right thing. The answer scared him, because he knew what Brennan would do if he tried. Knew what happened to people who betrayed Father Dominic Brennan. But as he walked back to his office, Harris made a decision. He would gather evidence, copy what documents he could find, build a case. And when the moment came when Marshal Grant arrived for his periodic inspection, Harris would tell the truth. It might cost him his life, but keeping silent was costing him his soul. Caleb and Margaret had covered another 7 miles by the time the sun reached its peak. They were in high country now, 10,000 feet up, where the air was thin and every breath felt like work. The snow was deeper here, 4 feet in places, making progress slow even with snowshoes. They stopped to rest beside a frozen stream. Caleb chipped through the ice with his knife, filling their canteens with water so cold it made their teeth ache. Margaret sat on a fallen log, her face flushed from exertion, her breath coming in clouds. "How much further to Jack's cabin?" she asked. "Another 8 miles. We should make it by tonight if we keep moving." Caleb handed her a canteen. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better, but I'll manage." Margaret drank the water, shocking her system. "What happens when we get there?" "We plan. Jack knows people knows the territory. He'll have ideas about how to get evidence against Brennan, how to contact authorities who aren't corrupt. You trust him that much. With my life. With yours." Caleb sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Since the kiss in the cave, something had shifted between them. They touched more now, casual contacts that spoke of growing intimacy. "Jack's seen a lot in his 70 years. If there's a way out of this mess, he'll know it." Margaret nodded, then tensed. "Caleb, what's that sound?" He'd heard it too. A distant sound like wind through trees, but regular, rhythmic, not natural. Horses. Caleb stood slowly, his hand going to his rifle. "How many?" Margaret whispered. He listened carefully, separating sounds, counting. 3, maybe 2 miles back, moving fast. "They found us already." "Not us, our trail." Caleb's mind raced. "They must have left at dawn, pushed hard. Professional trackers. This is bad." "What do we do?" Caleb looked around, assessing terrain. They were in a narrow valley forest on both sides, mountains rising steeply to the north. Good ambush country, but also limited escape routes. "We can't outrun them," he said. "Not over distance. They're on horses, we're on foot. They'll run us down by nightfall. Then we fight." "Not yet, not unless we have to." Caleb made his decision. "Come on. There's a place about a mile ahead of Box Canyon. We go in there, they'll have to come in after us. And if they come in, we'll have the advantage." They moved quickly now, abandoning stealth for speed. Caleb led them up a narrow trail that climbed steeply along the valley's northern wall. Margaret followed her legs, burning her lungs, screaming for air. Behind them, the sound of horses grew louder. They reached the canyon entrance just as the first rider appeared in the valley below. From their elevated position, Caleb could see them clearly. 3 men, professional by the look of them. Leading horses, moving with the confidence of people who knew they had the advantage. The lead rider stopped, looked up and saw them. Even from 300 yards away, Caleb could see the man's reaction. A slight stiffening, then a slow smile, the hunter acknowledging worthy prey. "Get in the canyon," Caleb said quietly. "All the way back. There's an overhang about 50 yards in. You can't be seen from the entrance." "What about you?" "I'm staying here, buying us time." "Caleb, no." "Go." His voice cracked like a whip. "Now." Margaret ran. Her instinct was to stay to fight beside him, but she knew she'd only be a liability. Better to trust him, to let him do what he did best. Caleb found a position behind a boulder that gave him a clear view of the approach. He laid out extra ammunition, checked his rifle, and settled in to wait. The 3 riders conferred briefly, then began their approach. Not rushing, taking their time. Smart. They knew Caleb was armed, knew he had the high ground. They'd be careful. When they were 200 yards away, Caleb fired. The shot kicked up snow 3 feet in front of the lead horse. The animal reared. The rider, to his credit, didn't panic. He controlled the horse, then dismounted smoothly. All 3 men took cover behind rocks. "Ashford," the lead rider called. His voice carried clearly in the thin air. "I'm Cole Mason. We just want to talk." Caleb didn't answer. Talking would give away his exact position. "Brennan sent us," Cole continued. "He's willing to negotiate. Let the woman go. You can walk away from this." Caleb smiled grimly. Lies. All of it lies. If they wanted to negotiate, they wouldn't have brought rifles. He waited. Patience was his greatest weapon right now. Let them make the first move. Let them expose themselves. 5 minutes passed. 10. The hunters weren't moving. They knew the game as well as he did. Then Caleb saw movement to the left. The short one trying to flank. Smart tactic, but Caleb had expected it. He swung his rifle, led the target slightly, and fired. The man dove behind a tree just as the bullet struck where he'd been standing. He was fast, very fast. "That was your warning shot," Cole Mason called. "Next time I won't miss." "Neither will we," Cole replied. And then all hell broke loose. The 3 hunters opened fire simultaneously, a coordinated barrage designed to keep Caleb pinned while they advanced. Bullets sparked off rock, whined through the air, kicked up explosions of snow. Caleb pressed himself flat behind the boulder. These weren't amateurs spraying and praying. These were professionals laying down covering fire while they moved. He risked a glance. The big one bear was making a run for better cover. Caleb tracked him, fired. The shot hit the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down but wasn't dead. Wounded, bleeding, but still in the fight. Cole Mason appeared at the edge of Caleb's vision, his rifle aimed. Caleb dove sideways just as Cole fired. The bullet passed so close Caleb felt the wind of it. This wasn't going to work. They were too good, too coordinated. In another 5 minutes they'd have him flanked, and then it would be over. Caleb made his decision. He grabbed his pack, fired 3 quick shots to keep their heads down, and ran deeper into the canyon. Behind him he heard Cole Mason's voice. "After him. But careful, he's as dangerous as they said." Caleb ran, his feet flying over snow and rock. The canyon narrowed ahead, becoming a slot barely 10 feet wide. Perfect, he could defend that. He found Margaret crouched under the overhang, her pistol in hand. Her eyes were wide but steady. "They're coming," Caleb said, breathing hard. "I hit one, but that still leaves 2 healthy and 1 wounded. We're in trouble." "What do we do?" Caleb looked around. The canyon ended about 30 yards ahead in a sheer rock wall. No way out. They were trapped. Unless... He looked up. The canyon walls were maybe 40 feet high here, steep, but not quite vertical. Possible to climb if you were desperate enough. "Can you climb?" he asked Margaret. "I'll do whatever I have to." "Good, because we're going up and over. It's our only chance." They moved to the back of the canyon. Caleb found what might charitably be called a path, a series of ledges and cracks that zigzagged up the rock face. It would be dangerous even in summer. In winter, with ice and snow, it was borderline suicidal. But staying here was definitely suicidal. "I'll go first," Caleb said. "Follow exactly where I put my hands and feet. Don't look down. Just focus on the next hold." He started climbing. The rock was cold, slick with ice in places. His fingers found cracks. His boots found tiny ledges. He moved carefully, testing each hold before trusting his weight to it. Margaret followed, her face set with determination. She was terrified, he could tell, but she didn't let it stop her. She climbed. They were 20 feet up when Cole Mason appeared at the canyon entrance. He saw them immediately, saw the impossible situation they'd put themselves in. For a moment he just stood there, his rifle lowered, watching 2 people risk death rather than surrender. "Ashford," he called. "Stop. You're going to kill yourself and the woman." Caleb didn't answer. He reached for the next handhold. Cole raised his rifle, aimed, then lowered it again. He could shoot Caleb easily from here. But if he did, Margaret would fall. And his orders were to kill both of them. Yes, but something about this didn't sit right. Something about watching a man risk everything to protect a woman who'd supposedly committed a crime with him. Something about the desperate courage it took to climb a frozen rock face rather than surrender. Cole Mason had hunted a lot of guilty people in his life. He knew what guilt looked like. This wasn't it. He made a decision. He raised his rifle and fired, but not at Caleb. He aimed 10 feet to the left, hitting nothing but rock. A warning shot. "I'm letting you go," he shouted. "But I can't call off the others forever. Get out of this territory, Ashford. Take the woman and run." Caleb paused in his climbing, looked down. For a moment his eyes met Cole's. A understanding passed between them. One professional to another. One man who knew the mountains to another who knew when the job wasn't right. Then Caleb resumed climbing. In 5 more minutes he'd pulled himself over the top. He reached down, grabbed Margaret's wrist, and hauled her up after him. They lay on the canyon rim, gasping for breath, their hands bloody from the climb. But they were alive, and they'd escaped. Below Cole, Mason watched them disappear over the ridgeline. Snake and Bear came up behind him, both breathing hard from the chase. "Why'd you let them go?" Snake demanded. "We could have shot them both." "We'll get another chance," Cole said, but his voice lacked conviction. "What do we tell Brennan?" "We tell him we lost the trail in the rocks. We tell him we'll pick it up again tomorrow." Cole turned away from the canyon. "But tonight we make camp, and we talk about what we're really getting into here." They walked back to their horses. Behind them, Caleb and Margaret ran across the high ridgeline, heading northeast toward Jack Mackenzie's cabin and whatever safety it might provide. The hunt was far from over, but the hunters were starting to have doubts, and doubt in this business could be as dangerous as any bullet. They reached old Jack's cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold. Caleb and Margaret stumbled down the final slope, exhausted beyond measure. Their hands were still bleeding from the climb. Their legs trembled with fatigue. But they were alive. The cabin was smaller than Caleb's, set in a sheltered valley at 7,000 feet. Smoke rose from the chimney, a welcoming sign of life and warmth. As they approached, the door opened, and an old man stepped out, rifle in hand. Jack Mackenzie was 68 years old, but he moved like a man 20 years younger. Tall and lean, with a full white beard and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He saw their condition, and his weathered face creased with concern. "Caleb," Jack said, "what in God's name happened to you?" "Long story, Jack. Can we come in?" "Of course, you damned fool. Get in here before you freeze." Jack stepped aside, then saw Margaret. His eyes widened slightly. "And who's this Sister Margaret Barrett? She's the reason we're here." Jack's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. He gestured them inside. "Come on, both of you. I'll put on coffee, and you can tell me everything." The cabin's interior was warm and cluttered. Books lined shelves made from rough-hewn boards. Furs covered the floor. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace. It smelled of wood-smoked coffee and the particular scent of a place where a man had lived alone for many years. Jack sat them down near the fire, poured coffee from a battered pot, and waited. He'd learned patience in 7 decades of mountain living. He didn't rush them. He let them warm up, let them drink, let them catch their breath. Finally, Caleb spoke. He told Jack everything. About finding Margaret hanging from the tree. About Brennan's accusations. About the stolen money Margaret had discovered. About the 3 hunters who'd tracked them through the mountains. About Cole Mason's mysterious decision to let them escape. Jack listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each revelation. When Caleb finished, the old man sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Brennan," he finally said, and the name was a curse. "That man's been a cancer on this territory for 5 years. I knew he was corrupt, knew he was stealing land, but I didn't know it was this bad." "Can you help us?" Margaret asked. Her voice was hoarse with exhaustion. "Help you, girl? I've been waiting for someone to stand up to that devil for years. Of course I'll help you." Jack stood, paced to the window, looked out at the darkening valley. "But we need to be smart about this. Brennan has money, power, and men. We have the truth. That's something, but it's not enough on its own. What do we need? Caleb asked. Evidence, witnesses, and protection. Jack turned back to them. I know people. Sarah Mitchell, for one. She lost her land to Brennan 3 years ago, forced to sign it over at gunpoint while her children watched. She'll testify if we can protect her. One witness won't be enough, Margaret said. No, but there are others. Eleanor Price, widow, lost her husband's mining claim. Thomas Webb, rancher, lost half his herd to Brennan's taxes. John Davis, whose house Brennan burned. Jack counted on his fingers. I can name a dozen people who have grievances, but they're all scared. Brennan has Deputy Harris in his pocket. Local law won't help. We need federal intervention. U.S. Marshal, Caleb suggested. Marshal William Grant. He comes through Red Creek every few months checking on territorial matters. Brennan's always managed to hide his corruption when Grant's around. But if we could get Grant here now with witnesses ready to testify with evidence in hand, we might have a chance. Margaret leaned forward. How do we contact him? Telegraph from Silverton. That's 40 miles west. 3-day ride in good weather. In winter, maybe 5 days. Jack stroked his beard, thinking. But we have another problem. Those hunters. Even if Cole Mason's having second thoughts, the other two aren't. And Brennan will just hire more if these ones fail. We need to deal with that threat. I can deal with hunters, Caleb said quietly. Not 3 at once, you can't. Not for long. Jack sat back down. No, we need a different approach. We need to turn them. Turn them how? By making them realize they're hunting the wrong people. By showing them what Brennan really is. Jack looked at Margaret. Sister, you said you found ledger books showing the theft. Yes, but Brennan has them now. Does he, or did he hide them somewhere he thought was safe? Jack's eyes gleamed. Men like Brennan, they don't destroy evidence. They keep it as insurance, as blackmail material. Those books are somewhere in Red Creek, probably in his office or his private rooms, if we could get them. That's suicide, Caleb said. We'd have to go back to town, break into the church, find the books, and get out without being caught. Yes, that's exactly what we'd have to do. Jack grinned, showing teeth. Good thing I know a way into that church that Brennan doesn't know about. Built it myself 20 years ago, when the place was first constructed. Margaret and Caleb exchanged glances. You're serious, Caleb said. As the grave. Which is where we're all headed if we don't stop Brennan. Jack stood again, moved to a trunk in the corner, and pulled out maps. Here's my thinking. Tomorrow, Caleb, you go to Silverton. Send the telegram to Marshal Grant. Tell him there's evidence of major corruption in Red Creek, and he needs to come immediately. That's a 3-day trip there and back, maybe 4. What about Margaret? She stays here with me. Safer that way. While you're gone, Margaret and I will make contact with potential witnesses. Sarah Mitchell lives only 5 miles from here. We'll start with her. And the hunters. Jack's smile was wolf-like. Leave them to me. I know these mountains better than anyone alive. I'll send them on a wild chase that'll take them a week to unravel. By the time they figure it out, Marshal Grant will be here, and it'll be too late. Caleb looked at Margaret. What do you think? She took a deep breath. I think it's risky. But everything's risky now, and we can't keep running forever. We have to fight back. All right, then. Caleb turned to Jack. When do I leave? Dawn. Get some sleep. You'll need it. Jack stood, stretched. I'll take first watch. Those hunters might try to find us tonight. But the hunters didn't come that night, or the next day, or the day after that, because Cole Mason was wrestling with his conscience, and the wrestling was not going well. Cole Mason sat by the campfire cleaning his rifle with methodical care. Snake and Bear were asleep in their bedrolls, exhausted from another fruitless day of tracking. They'd lost Ashford's trail after the canyon escape and spent 3 days searching without finding it again. Cole had known exactly where to look. The tracks led northeast toward Jack McKenzie's place. He'd seen them clear as day. And he'd led his men in the opposite direction. He didn't know why he'd done it. He was a hunter, a professional. You took the money, you did the job, you didn't ask questions. That was the code he'd lived by for 20 years. But something about this job was different. Something about watching Ashford risk his life climbing that cliff to protect the woman. Something about Brennan's too smooth lies and too generous payment. Something about the fear he'd seen in Deputy Harris's eyes. Cole had hunted guilty men before. He knew what guilt looked like. Ashford wasn't guilty. Neither was the woman, which meant Brennan was paying him to murder innocent people. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Snake stirred, woke up, sat up in his bedroll. "Boss, you all right?" "Can't sleep. Thinking about the tracks we missed." Cole looked at him. Snake was small and weasel-like, but he wasn't stupid. He knew Cole had deliberately led them astray. He'd known from the first day, but he'd gone along with it, asking no questions. "Why haven't you said anything?" Cole asked. "About what? About me sabotaging this hunt?" Snake shrugged. "Figure you got your reasons. You always do." He moved to sit by the fire, held his hands out to the warmth. "This job's rotten, boss. We both know it. Question is what we're going to do about it." "I don't know." "Well, I do. We go back to Red Creek. We tell Brennan we lost the trail. We collect our money and we leave." Snake looked at Cole directly. "Or we do something different. We find out what's really going on, and maybe we end up on the right side for once. The right side doesn't pay as well." "No, but you sleep better." Snake poked the fire with a stick. "I've done a lot of bad things in my life, Cole. Hunted people who probably didn't deserve it. Killed men who maybe didn't need killing. But I never knowingly murdered an innocent woman. Don't intend to start now." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What about Bear?" "Bear does what we tell him. Always has. And if Brennan comes after us, then we deal with Brennan." Snake's eyes glinted in the firelight. "I'm good at dealing with men like Brennan." Cole made his decision. "All right. Tomorrow we go to Red Creek. But we don't report to Brennan. We do some investigating of our own, find out what he's really hiding, and then we decide what to do with that information." "Now you're talking sense." They sat by the fire together, two men who'd spent their lives on the wrong side of the law, wondering if it was possible even now to do something right. Caleb stood in the telegraph office watching as the operator tapped out his message. It had taken him 4 days to reach Silverton, riding hard through mountain passes that were barely open. He'd pushed himself to the limit, driven by the fear that every hour's delay was another hour Margaret was in danger. The message was simple. To Marshal William Grant, stop. Urgent corruption in Red Creek. Stop. Father Brennan stealing funds. Stop. Witnesses ready to testify. Stop. Come immediately. Stop. Caleb Ashford. The operator finished, looked up. "That'll be $2. Reply will take at least a day, maybe 2, depending on where the marshal is." Caleb paid, then asked, "Any way to make it faster?" "Not unless you can fly. Telegraph only goes so fast." The operator studied him. "This about that nun they say stole from the church. She didn't steal anything. She discovered the theft." "Huh. That's not the story going around." The operator leaned back in his chair. "Word is Father Brennan's offering a $1,000 reward for her and her accomplice, dead or alive." Caleb's blood ran cold. $1,000. That's what I heard. Every bounty hunter between here and Denver's probably heading to Red Creek right now. Caleb ran from the office. He had to get back. Had to warn Jack and Margaret. $1,000 would bring dozens of hunters, maybe hundreds. They didn't have days. They had hours. He rode through the night, pushing his horse harder than he should have. The animal was exhausted, but Caleb couldn't stop, couldn't rest. Every instinct was screaming that something was wrong. He reached Jack's cabin at dawn on the 5th day. What he found there made his heart stop. The door was hanging open. Snow had blown inside. The fire was cold, long dead. Signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, blood on the floor, and a note pinned to the table with a knife. Caleb read it, his hands shaking. "Ashford, I have the woman and the old man. Come to Red Creek alone if you want them to live. You have until sunset tomorrow. Father Brennan." Caleb's vision blurred with rage and fear. He'd left them. He'd thought they'd be safe. He'd been wrong. He looked at the blood on the floor. Not much. Maybe Jack had fought back, managed to wound one of the attackers, but it hadn't been enough. They'd been taken. The note said he had until sunset tomorrow. That was 30 hours. Not much time, but enough. Caleb walked to Jack's weapons cache and began gathering everything he'd need. Rifles, revolvers, ammunition, knives. He loaded himself down with enough weaponry to fight a small war, because that's what he was about to do. He would go to Red Creek. He would face Brennan, and he would get Margaret and Jack back or die trying. The time for running was over. The time for hiding was done. Now came the reckoning. Margaret woke to darkness and the smell of damp earth. Her head throbbed. The last thing she remembered was men bursting into Jack's cabin, a brief struggle, then something hard hitting her skull. Now she was here, wherever here was. She tried to move and realized her hands were tied behind her back, her feet bound at the ankles. She was sitting on cold stone, her back against a wall. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out dim shapes in the darkness. Boxes, barrels, what looked like old church furnishings. A basement. She was in a basement. "You're awake." The voice came from her left. Jack Mackenzie. "Welcome back to consciousness, girl. Sorry about the accommodations." "Jack? Are you hurt?" "Got a lump on my head the size of an egg, but I'll live." "You?" "Same." Margaret tested her bonds. Tight, professional. Whoever had tied them knew what they were doing. "Where are we?" "Church basement, if I'm not mistaken, under the main sanctuary. I helped build this place 20 years ago. Used to store supplies down here." "How long have we been here?" "About a day. They brought us in after dark, didn't want anyone seeing." Jack's voice was rough but steady. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I should have been more careful. Should have posted better watch." "It's not your fault. How many were there?" 4 men, not the hunters we expected, different ones, fresh from Denver, probably drawn by the increased bounty." Jack coughed. "Brennan's getting desperate. That's good and bad. Good because desperate men make mistakes. Bad because they do desperate things." Before Margaret could respond, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Light spilled down from above as a door opened. 2 men descended carrying lanterns. Behind them came Father Dominic Brennan. In the lantern light, Brennan looked different than Margaret remembered. The genial priest facade was gone. His face was hard, his eyes cold. This was the real man finally revealed. "Sister Margaret," Brennan said pleasantly, "I do hope you're comfortable. I'm afraid the accommodations are rather Spartan." "Where's Caleb?" Margaret demanded. "Mr. Ashford is on his way, I expect. I left him a note. Very dramatic, really. Come alone or they die. He'll come. Men like him always do. They can't help themselves." "You won't get away with this." Brennan laughed. "My dear girl, I already have. For 5 years I've run this town exactly as I please. No one has stopped me. No one will stop me. Certainly not a mountain hermit and a defrocked nun." "I'm not defrocked." "You will be, posthumously, of course. The story will be tragic. Sister Margaret, driven mad by guilt over her theft, led her accomplice and poor old Jack Mackenzie to their deaths in a desperate flight from justice. All 3 frozen in the mountains. So sad." Jack spoke up, his voice carrying an edge. "That's a lot of bodies to explain, Brennan." "Is it people die in winter all the time? It's tragic but hardly unusual." Brennan knelt down so he was eye level with Margaret. "You could have made this easy. You could have kept your mouth shut about the ledgers, but you had to be righteous, had to be moral, and now you'll die for it." "At least I'll die with my conscience clear," Margaret said. "Can you say the same?" Something flickered across Brennan's face. Anger, perhaps, or guilt quickly suppressed. He stood abruptly. "Keep them here," he told the guards. "No food, minimal water. I want them weak when Ashford arrives, and keep watch on the roads. The moment you see him, you tell me." Brennan left. The guards followed, taking the light with them. The door closed. Darkness returned. Margaret and Jack sat in silence for a moment. Then Jack spoke quietly. "He made a mistake." "What do you mean?" "He left us together. He should have separated us." Jack's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. And he doesn't know about the loose stone in the east wall, the one I used 20 years ago to hide a bottle of whiskey from the preacher. What good does that do us? Behind that stone is a crawl space, leads to an old root cellar. From there, tunnel to the outside, emergency exit. I built it myself, never told anyone. Jack shuffled in the darkness. Question is, can I reach it with my hands tied? Margaret heard him moving, grunting with effort. Minutes passed, then, got it. Stone's loose. Now if I can just... A scraping sound, a soft thud. Then Jack's voice triumphant. Through. There's a knife in here, old rusty but sharp enough. Hold still. Margaret felt him working at her bonds. The rope was tight, but slowly, methodically, Jack sawed through it. Her hands came free, then her feet. She immediately turned and freed Jack. We need to go now, Jack whispered, before they check on us. What about Caleb? If we leave, he'll walk into a trap. And if we stay, we're all dead. Better we escape, warn him before he gets here. Jack moved toward the crawl space. Come on, it's tight, but we'll fit. They crawled into the darkness, the stone closing behind them. The tunnel was, as Jack described, narrow and claustrophobic, filled with the smell of earth and decay. They crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, they emerged into the root cellar. From there, a trapdoor led outside. Jack pushed it open carefully, looked out. Night, empty street. Brennan's men will be watching the main roads, Jack whispered. But I know back ways. Come on. They slipped into the darkness. 2 prisoners escaped, heading to warn the man who'd saved them. Behind them in the church basement, it would be hours before anyone discovered they were gone. By then, everything would have changed. Caleb rode through the pre-dawn darkness, his mind focused on one thing, getting to Red Creek before sunset. He had a plan, if you could call it that. Ride in, find where they were holding Margaret and Jack, get them out, kill anyone who tried to stop him. It wasn't a good plan. It was barely a plan at all, but it was all he had. He was 5 miles from town when he saw figures on the road ahead, 2 people walking. He drew his rifle, approached cautiously. Then recognition hit him like a physical blow. Margaret. He kicked his horse into a gallop. They turned at the sound, saw him coming. Margaret's face broke into a smile of pure relief. Caleb dismounted before the horse fully stopped, ran to her, pulled her into his arms. She was alive. She was here. She was safe. How? He asked, his face buried in her hair. How did you escape? Jack. He found a way out. Margaret pulled back, looked at him. Caleb, it's a trap. Brennan's waiting for you. He has men everywhere. I know. I was coming anyway. That's what I thought. She touched his face, her hand gentle. You would have died. Better than living without you. The words came out before he could stop them. Simple, true, undeniable. Jack limped up, grinning despite his injuries. Well, that's touching and all, but we still have a problem. Brennan thinks he has us. When he finds out we escaped, he'll come looking. We need to move. Where? Caleb asked. Back to my cabin. It's defensible, and I have supplies. Jack looked at the brightening sky. But we need to hurry. Once the sun's up, we'll be visible. They rode together, Caleb and Margaret on his horse. Jack on a horse they'd borrowed, which was a polite word for stolen from a Red Creek stable. As they rode, Margaret told Caleb everything that had happened. The capture, the basement, Brennan's threats, their escape. He said he's been doing this for 5 years, Margaret finished. Taking land, stealing money, hurting people. And no one stopped him. Someone's about to, Caleb said grimly. They reached Jack's cabin by mid-morning. The place was as they'd left it, doors still broken from the attack, but otherwise intact. They immediately set about fortifying it, boarding up windows, stacking furniture for barricades, loading weapons. They'll come, Jack said. Question is when. And how many, Caleb added. He was checking his rifle, his movements automatic. Brennan knows we escaped by now. He'll send everyone he has. Good. Margaret's voice was hard. Let them come. I'm tired of running. Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd been a terrified nun 5 days ago. Now she stood with a rifle in her hands, her jaw set, ready to fight. The transformation was remarkable. "You know how to use that?" he asked. "You taught me remember, point, and shoot." She met his eyes. "I won't let them take us without a fight." "That's my girl," Jack said with approval. Then to Caleb, "You found yourself a good one, son." "I know." They waited. Noon came and went. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. The sun began its descent toward the western peaks. And still no one came. "Maybe they're not coming," Margaret said, but she didn't sound convinced. "They're coming," Caleb replied. "They're just being careful." He was right. At 3 o'clock, Jack, who was watching the eastern approach, gave a low whistle. "Company. 10 men, maybe more." Caleb moved to the window, looked out. A group of riders was approaching, slowly, spread out, professional. In the center, easily recognizable even at a distance, was Father Dominic Brennan. "He came himself," Caleb said. "That's arrogant." "Or desperate." Jack checked his rifle. "Either way, this is about to get ugly." The riders stopped 200 yards out, just beyond effective rifle range. Brennan dismounted, walked forward alone. Bold or foolish, Caleb couldn't decide which. "Ashford," Brennan called. "I know you're in there. Come out. Let's talk like reasonable men." Caleb didn't answer. "I have a proposition," Brennan continued. "The woman and the old man can go free, all charges dropped. You just have to leave, disappear back into your mountains, and never come back." "He's lying," Margaret said. "Of course he's lying," Jack agreed. "Question is, what do we do about it?" Caleb made a decision. He stood open the door and stepped outside. Behind him, he heard Margaret gasp, but he didn't turn back. He walked toward Brennan, his rifle held loosely in one hand, stopped 50 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to react if things went bad. "I'm listening," Caleb said. Brennan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Wise choice. I'm offering you a chance, Ashford. Walk away from this. Take your woman, take your friend, and disappear. I'll even throw in $1,000 for your trouble. And in return, you forget everything Sister Margaret told you. You forget the ledgers, the stolen land, all of it. You vanish and everyone lives. Everyone except your victims. Casualties of progress." Brennan spread his hands. "This territory is growing, Ashford. It needs strong leadership. I provide that leadership. Sometimes people get hurt. That's unfortunate but necessary." "You mean you steal from them?" "I acquire resources that would otherwise be wasted. I use them to build this community. In 20 years, Red Creek will be a city prosperous and powerful. I'll have made that happen. By destroying innocent people." Brennan's smile faded. "Innocent. There's no such thing as innocent. Everyone's guilty of something. I just make sure the guilt serves a purpose." Caleb studied the man in front of him. He'd met men like Brennan during the war, officers who sent soldiers to their deaths with a smile, who justified every atrocity as necessary for the greater good. He'd hated them then. He hated them now. "I'm not leaving," Caleb said quietly. "Then you're a fool." "Maybe, but I'm a fool with principles." Brennan's face hardened. "Very well. You've made your choice." He turned, walked back toward his men. Over his shoulder he called, "You have until sunset to reconsider. After that, we come in." He mounted his horse and the group rode back out of range. But they didn't leave. They set up camp, clearly preparing for a siege. Caleb returned to the cabin. Margaret met him at the door, her face pale. "That was incredibly stupid," she said. "Probably. He's going to attack at sunset." "I know. We're outnumbered 10 to 1. "I know that too." Caleb closed the door, barred it. "But I had to try. Had to give him a chance to do the right thing. And now we prepare." He turned to Jack. "You said you know these mountains better than anyone. Is there a way out of this that doesn't involve fighting?" Jack thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Not with that many men. They've got all the approaches covered. If we try to run, they'll pick us off. Then we make a stand." The three of them spent the next hour preparing. Caleb positioned himself at the main window, the one facing the enemy camp. Jack took the west side, Margaret the east. They had plenty of ammunition food for several days, water from the nearby stream. They could hold out for a while. The question was whether help would come before they were overrun. As the sun touched the western peaks painting the snow in shades of red and gold, Brennan's men began to move. They spread out, approaching from 3 sides, using trees and rocks for cover. "Here they come," Jack said quietly. Caleb raised his rifle, sighted down the barrel at the nearest target. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied. This was familiar territory. This was what he'd been trained for in the war. This was survival. The first shot came from Brennan's side, meant to test their defenses. It hit the cabin wall, splintering wood. Caleb returned fire. His bullet caught the shooter in the leg. The man went down screaming. The message was clear: they could fight back. For the next hour it was sporadic shooting from both sides, Brennan's men probing for weaknesses. Caleb, Jack, and Margaret defending their position. Several of Brennan's men went down wounded but not dead. On their side, a bullet grazed Jack's shoulder, drawing blood, but nothing serious. As night fell, the shooting stopped. Both sides rested, waiting for the next phase. "They'll try to burn us out," Jack said, bandaging his shoulder. "That's what I'd do. Wait for full dark, then torch the cabin." "We can't let that happen," Margaret said. "We won't." Caleb checked his ammunition. "I'm going out there." "What? No." Margaret grabbed his arm. "That's suicide. It's our only chance. They're bunched up, waiting for dark. I can get around behind them, take out a few, create chaos. In the confusion, you two can escape." "Absolutely not," Margaret said firmly. "She's right," Jack agreed. "We stay together." "Then we die together." "Maybe," Jack smiled grimly, "but we'll take a bunch of them with us." Before anyone could say more, they heard something. A sound in the distance. Horses. Many horses. Caleb moved to the window, looked out. From the north, a large group was approaching. At least 20 riders, moving fast. "More of Brennan's men?" Margaret asked. "I don't think so." Caleb stared into the darkness. "They're not coming from town. They're coming from the opposite direction." The riders came closer. As they entered the moonlight, Caleb saw who led them. Cole Mason. The hunter had returned, and he'd brought help. Cole Mason rode straight into Brennan's camp, his gun drawn. Behind him were not just Snake and Bear, but a dozen other men. Miners, ranchers, townspeople. Men who'd lost land to Brennan, whose families had been hurt, who'd been waiting for someone to stand up to the corrupt priest. And they'd found their moment. "Brennan," Cole's voice carried across the snow. "It's over. Drop your weapons." Brennan, surrounded suddenly by armed men on all sides, had no choice. His hired guns, seeing the odds had shifted, began laying down their weapons. They'd been paid to hunt, not to die in a losing fight. Within minutes, it was done. Brennan's men were disarmed and tied. Brennan himself stood in the center of his former camp, his face ashen. Cole dismounted, walked to the cabin, knocked on the door. "Ashford, you can come out. It's safe." Caleb opened the door cautiously, his rifle ready. When he saw Cole wasn't threatening him, he lowered the weapon. "What's going on?" Caleb asked. "Justice," Cole said simply. "Real justice, not Brennan's version." He gestured to the men behind him. "These folks are ready to testify. And I found something interesting in Brennan's office. Ledger books. Detailed records of every theft, every shakedown, every crime for the past 5 years." Margaret stepped forward, her eyes wide. "You found them, the real ledgers. Locked in a safe. Wasn't even that hard to crack." Cole pulled out a leather-bound book, handed it to her. "Everything you need. Names, dates, amounts. It's all there." Margaret opened the book, scanned the pages. Tears filled her eyes. "This is it. This is the evidence we need." "And there's more," Cole said. "Deputy Harris came to me yesterday. Told me everything. About Robert Thompson's murder. About the land seizures. About Brennan's whole operation. He's willing to testify." As if summoned by his name, Samuel Harris emerged from the group of riders. He looked haggard, years older than when Caleb had last seen him. He walked to where Brennan stood and pulled off his deputy's star. "I'm done," Harris said. "Done lying for you. Done covering up your crimes. Done being a coward." He threw the star at Brennan's feet. You said no one would stand up to you. You were wrong." Brennan's carefully constructed world was crumbling. He looked around at the faces surrounding him, faces of people he'd hurt, people he'd cheated, people he'd thought too weak or too scared to fight back. He'd been wrong about all of them. "You can't prove anything," Brennan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We can prove everything," Cole replied. "We have the books. We have witnesses. We have Harris's testimony about Thompson's murder." He stepped closer to Brennan. "You're done." At that moment, another rider appeared on the northern trail. This one wore a badge that gleamed in the moonlight. U.S. Marshal William Grant. The marshal had received Caleb's telegram and ridden hard for Red Creek. He'd arrived to find a town in chaos and a priest about to be arrested by a bounty hunter turned lawman. Grant took in the scene with experienced eyes. He'd seen corruption before, had rooted it out from a dozen frontier towns. This was bad, but not unfamiliar. "Someone want to tell me what's going on?" Grant asked. They did. All of them. Caleb told him about rescuing Margaret. Margaret showed him the ledgers. Harris confessed his role and his knowledge of Thompson's murder. Sarah Mitchell, who'd ridden with Cole's group, told of losing her land. One by one, the witnesses came forward. By dawn, the case against Father Dominic Brennan was overwhelming. Grant arrested Brennan personally, placing him in irons. "Dominic Brennan, you're under arrest for theft, fraud, intimidation, conspiracy, and murder. You'll be transported to Denver for trial." Brennan, in chains, looked at Caleb one last time. "You've won nothing," he said. "In 6 months, someone else will take my place. That's how the world works." "Maybe," Caleb replied, "but it won't be you, and that's enough for today." They took Brennan away. Harris went with them to give his formal testimony and face whatever consequences came from his years of complicity. Cole Mason and his men dispersed, some to return to their lives, others to help the marshal secure evidence. As the sun rose over the mountains, Caleb, Margaret, and Jack stood together outside the cabin, watching the last of the riders disappear. "It's over," Margaret said, almost not believing it. "This part is," Jack agreed. "But you two have decisions to make now. What comes next?" Caleb looked at Margaret. She looked back at him. In the golden light of dawn, with the worst behind them, they could finally think about the future. "I should return to the convent," Margaret said slowly. "Explain what happened. Ask for release from my vows." "Should you?" Caleb asked. "Or do you want to?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to. The convent was where I went to hide from life after Thomas died. But I'm not hiding anymore. I'm ready to live again. With me." The question was vulnerable, hopeful. "If you'll have me." Caleb's answer was to pull her close and kiss her there in the dawn light, with Jack grinning and looking away to give them privacy. When they finally separated, Jack cleared his throat. "So, what's the plan? You two going back to Caleb's cabin live as mountain hermits?" "No," Caleb said. "I've been hiding for 10 years. That's long enough. We'll get a place in town. Maybe Red Creek, maybe somewhere else. Somewhere we can be part of a community." "And do what?" Caleb looked at Margaret. "Whatever comes next. Together." The house was small but comfortable, set on the outskirts of Red Creek, with a view of the mountains. Caleb had built it himself over the course of a summer with help from Jack and several other townspeople. It had 2 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a covered porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. Margaret stood on that porch now, one hand on her swollen belly. 8 months pregnant. Their first child a daughter, if the midwife's predictions were correct. They planned to name her Catherine, after Caleb's first wife. Margaret had insisted. The past deserved to be honored, not forgotten. Caleb came out of the barn, saw her, and smiled. That smile was more common now. He'd never be a man who smiled easily, but the darkness that had consumed him for so long had lifted. He was healing. They both were. He climbed the porch steps, put his arm around her waist, felt the baby kick against his hand. "Active today," he observed. "She's excited. Jack's coming for dinner, and she likes Jack's stories." Everyone likes Jack's stories. Caleb kissed Margaret's temple. "How are you feeling?" "Enormous, uncomfortable, impatient." She leaned into him. "And happier than I ever thought I'd be again." They stood together watching the light fade from the sky. In the distance they could see Red Creek transformed in 2 years. Brennan was gone serving a life sentence in a Denver prison. Harris had testified, received a reduced sentence for his cooperation, and was now working as a ranch hand trying to rebuild his life. Cole Mason had become something of a local legend, the bounty hunter who'd chosen justice over money. And Red Creek itself had changed. New businesses had opened. Fair laws were enforced. The land Brennan had stolen was being returned to its rightful owners. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Much better. The sound of horse hooves drew their attention. Jack McKenzie rode up, now 70 years old but still spry. He dismounted with only a slight wince from his old bear wound. "Evening, you two," Jack called. "Hope I'm not late." "Right on time," Margaret said. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." They ate together, the three of them sharing stories and laughter. Jack told about his latest adventure tracking a bear that had been raiding chicken coops. Caleb talked about the new barn he was building. Margaret shared news from town, the gossip and small dramas that made up daily life. After dinner, as Jack was preparing to leave, he paused at the door. "You know," he said, "2 years ago I thought we were all going to die in that cabin. Surrounded, outgunned, facing a man with all the power." "So did I," Caleb admitted. "But we didn't. We fought. We stood together. And we won." Jack looked at them both. "That's worth remembering. When things look darkest, when it seems like evil has won, sometimes all it takes is a few people willing to stand up. That's all. Just a few people who refuse to give up." "Is there a point to this philosophy?" Margaret asked, smiling. "The point is that you two did that. You stood up, you didn't run, didn't hide, didn't give in. And because of that, a lot of people are living better lives now." Jack smiled. "I'm proud to know you both." After he left, Caleb and Margaret stood on the porch again, his arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever regret it?" Margaret asked. "Leaving your cabin, joining the world again?" Caleb thought about it. He thought about the 10 years he'd spent in isolation punishing himself for a tragedy he couldn't have prevented. He thought about the letter from Catherine finally opened and read with its message of forgiveness and love. He thought about the life he'd built with Margaret, the community they'd become part of, the child about to be born. "No," he said. "No regrets. Catherine was right. The measure of a man isn't what he possesses. It's what he does with what he's been given. I was given a second chance, and I'm not going to waste it." Margaret turned to look at him. "I love you, Caleb Ashford." "I love you too, Margaret Ashford." They kissed as the stars began to appear overhead, two people who'd found each other in the darkest of times and built something beautiful from the ashes of their past. Inside, the fire crackled. Outside, the mountains stood silent and eternal. And in the distance, Red Creek slept peacefully, unaware that the story of the mountain man and the nun had already passed into legend, would be told around fires for generations to come, a story about courage and justice and the power of standing up for what's right. In the ranch house in Wyoming, old Caleb Ashford finished his story. The fire had burned low. The snow had stopped falling. Tommy sat across from him, his eyes wide. "So Grandma Maggie," Tommy said, "she really stood up to all those men, even though she was scared." "Especially because she was scared," Caleb replied. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. And you went from hiding in the mountains to living in town." "I did. Your grandmother taught me that running from pain doesn't make it go away. You have to face it, work through it, and on the other side, if you're lucky, you find peace." Tommy was quiet for a moment. Then, "Grandpa, you said I'd have to make a choice. What choice?" Caleb leaned forward. "You're 15 years old. You're angry at the world. You don't trust anyone. You think everyone's out for themselves. I know because I was you once. The choice is this: Do you let that anger consume you? Or do you choose to believe that there's still good in the world, that people can change, that standing up for what's right matters? What if I choose wrong? Then you learn from it and choose better next time. That's what life is, Tommy. A series of choices, some good, some bad, but the important thing is that you keep choosing, you don't give up, you don't stop trying. Tommy stood, walked to the fire, stared into the flames. After a long moment he turned back to his grandfather. "I choose to believe," he said, "like you did, like Grandma did." Caleb smiled the same smile that Margaret had loved, that had become more common in the 47 years they'd shared before her death 5 years ago. "That's my boy," Caleb said. "That's exactly right." Outside the snow began to fall again, gentle and pure, covering the old ranch in white. Inside, an old man and his grandson sat together. The story told the lesson learned, the wisdom passed from one generation to the next. And in the mountains of Colorado, in a small cemetery outside Red Creek, 2 headstones stood side by side. The inscriptions were simple. Caleb Ashford, 1853–1928. He chose courage. Margaret Ashford, 1850–1920. She chose truth. Together they had chosen each other, and that had made all the difference. The story was over, but its echoes would continue rippling out through time, inspiring others to stand up, to fight back, to choose love over fear and justice over silence. Because that's what stories do. They survive, they teach, they transform. And this story, the story of the widow who wasn't afraid and the mountain man who learned to live again, would survive long after the teller had gone, a testament to the power of courage in the face of darkness.